Want to help me expose a racist slumlord in my neighborhood? Let's go! Allegedly. Mark Fishman is the biggest landlord in Logan Square, and he tried to evict a woman over flying a Palestinian flag. Before we get to that, let's talk about what he did at Logan Theater last week. Logan Square is a notoriously historical theater that's remained unchanged since about the 1920s, and Mark Fisher owns it. On the first day of Ramadan last week, he decided to do a private screening of an Israeli propaganda video called Nova. How do I know? One of my friends is the manager there and told me all about it. He says peace protesters found out and occupied the lobby. Mark Fishman fired him for taking these videos and leaking the event. Oh, Fishman, you can't hide. So not only is he evicting people for flying the Palestinian flag, but he's firing people for leaking that there was a special event of edited footage of the October 7th attacks from live feeds and other social media platforms. Mark Fishman has been the enemy of the week for a while in Logan Square. From this article in the middle of the pandemic, it describes how he raised rents. And these aren't properties that he bought and then raised the rent because the properties were a lot of money and he had to pay back the mortgage. These are properties he had already owned. One example of this was Estefania Salgado, who had been a tenant of his for 5 years. He sent her a 30-day notice that he was going to almost double her rent. Now, of course, this is to keep up with market value, right? But even since property taxes have definitely gone up in the past few years, they haven't doubled. This is a clear case of greed, and he does it because he can. Just to put it into perspective, Mark Fishman owns over 1,000 rental units in my neighborhood. That's right, around 1,100 units belong to him. He's been gentrifying the neighborhood since about 2013. When I moved here in 2012, it consisted of 3 things: struggling artists, me making about $1,000 a month, large Polish and Mexican communities. Mark Fishman began to close the low-cost artist hub in Logan Square, where a lot of these struggling artists would have their shows and produce their art. He then became the face of gentrification as all of these artist studios began to close and everything ended up empty. He then immersed himself in the Logan Square arts community, where he found himself on the board but had to step down due to corruption. The straw that broke the camel's back was from the Milwaukee Avenue Arts Festival, where there was an exhibit critical of Mark Fishman. This art piece was thrown out of the festival. So no freedom of speech, not even in art, when he owns everything. But Mark Fishman's attempt to own everything and control everyone with money doesn't stop there. He gave politician Amanda Dietrich $100,000 to her campaign because she was trying to deny affordable housing in the neighborhood, which is exactly what he wanted. He wanted to nullify, cancel, and void 100% affordable housing development in Logan Square. Yeah, so he tried to sway politicians with $100,000. But even though it ultimately didn't work, it's just another example of his greed. The project that he was railing so hard against would simply house 100 working class and poor families, which is the population that has been displaced because of all the real estate he's been buying up. And his company has a 2-star review. These reviews aren't from the protests last week. Not many people even know about that. These reviews are from tenants who say he might be one of the world's worst human beings. Wow. Saying that the Sawyer building is filled with cockroaches and management does little to nothing to deal with it. Kirsten says that the year she lived there was the absolute worst year of her life. Of course there are good reviews, but even the 3-star reviews that look kind of okay from the front, when you look deeper, they start talking about roach problems and non-refundable deposits, saying the business practices were, quote, shifty. If you're wondering what happened from the Palestinian flag situation, here's the deal. In the lease agreement, it says that they should not be able to place any article outside of the windows or on the exterior walls, which is where the flag was. So the tenant was in violation of the lease agreement. But a lot of people are saying there are Cubs flags being flown outside of this building all the time, and those tenants aren't being forcibly evicted. The tenant that did fly the flag was Palestinian. She feels that her displacement locally, in a way, ironically parallels historical and present-day displacements of Palestinians by Israeli settlers. She's allowed to feel what she feels, and he's legally allowed to do what he's doing. I do find it weird, though, that he decided to do a propaganda screening of the Israeli attacks on the first night of Ramadan. Kind of an interesting day to decide to do something like that, don't you think? This is just one example of people with a lot of money being able to displace entire neighborhoods and do whatever they want. You know it happens all the time, but I think showing a clear example of a real-life situation is really helpful. I can't do much, but we can, and awareness is the first step. Follow for more tea.